what we used here was probably 30 to 1. So there was still green in it. So if it's got green in it, generally that's nitrogen. Now, for anything to break down, you need microorganisms. It's the microorganisms that break down, whether it be bacteria or fungi. Now, they need nitrogen as an energy source. It's what they use to burn the engine, as it were. Now, if you put out a lot of carbon, very high carbon like we have here, you've actually got to feed the mulch, as though it's an independent thing to the plant. If you don't, what happens is when the microorganisms come in, they actually have to get nitrogen from somewhere. And where do you think they get it from?
From the soil.
From the soil, from your crop. That's right, you get nitrogen drawdown or nitrogen lockdown. And this is what happens with a lot of people. They put on a lot of mulch, which is good, but they don't feed the mulch, and then wonder why their plant's really struggling, and it's because the plant isn't getting the nitrogen. So if you use something like this, you've actually got to put a high source of nitrogen on there just to feed the mulch.
What do you put on?
Well, one of the highest sources of nitrogen that we can get is poultry manure. So you actually feed the mulch, and best to do it underneath it rather than on top of it. Because if you put it on top of it, nitrogen is highly volatile, and when it does aerosol, it'll go straight up back up here. So anything like Dynamic Lifter or K-Tech, any of these people who do those. However, you don't want to be using that to feed the plant, because it's the wrong form of nitrogen for feeding the plant. To feed a plant, you actually need to feed it amino acids, which is protein, and the same for you and me. If you feed your plant nitrates or nitrites, all you'll do is encourage insects to come and eat it, because that's the nitrogen they like. Okay? So you need to do it through amino acids, and the best way to do that is through compost. Okay, so if you take your protein, which we're going to see up in a minute here, and put it through a compost process, then you will be starting to feed it through microbial breakdown into amino acids, the nitrogen, that will be encapsulated and held within the compost, which will then feed the crop. But they don't have much organic matter in their soil because they've fried it with nitrogen usage. But it's the bacteria that have done it. And the bacteria are the ones who will dominate. If you use a lot of ammonia, urea type based fertilizers, you will have a bacterial dominated environment where you want bacteria and fungi. Okay? We harvest this probably in November, which is a bit of a iffy time because the storms are around. At the moment, this is much more tolerant than this one. So we've got three different garlics here. We've got a purple, two purples here, and a white. We've had the trials we did with this wood chip. I'll never use this again. Fantastic for compost. And actually we call them the guardians of the soil. Because what you'll find is that these are all trying to bring around balance of some form. So whenever you see, for classic example, these have huge fibrous roots. They do have a small taproot, but not much. Okay? There's another one which we get a lot of here, and most people know, cobbler's peg does the same thing. When you pull up a cobbler's peg, quite often they'll snap off, but if you can get to pull up, you'll find it's got this big fibrous root. And it has a very good reason why it has a big fibrous root, not a big taproot. Other things in here have got big taproots, like these ones here, like this turnip, wild turnip. We put one of these up, you see okay, totally different. It's got a totally different job to do. So when you start observing this and looking at these plants, they're different. And they're different because they have to fit into a different niche of what their job is to do. Okay? So this is a gatherer, it's a scavenger. It throws out all those tiny little roots, and it's basically grabbing hold of all the loose fertility, the loose nitrogen, anything that's not actually locked into the humus structure. They grab hold of it and stop it disappearing into, either going into the waterways or back into the air, and holding it in the soil. So that big fibrous root like that, that's going out, grabbing hold of everything. This one's doing a different job. So anything with a taproot quite often are miners. They're pulling stuff from down the bottom and pulling it back up onto the surface. So these leaves then drop on the surface, and the minerals that were down deep are now back on the top. Okay, so when we start looking at these, if you start observing at what they're doing, then you can start working with them. And actually, okay, we don't actually want that growing. Blue top's bringing in zinc, so if we don't want it there, we need to put zinc in the system. Okay, and the same with everything. So don't shoot the messenger. Okay, they're the guardians of the soil. They bring in the fertility, your grass takes it away. And how it takes it away is because the cow comes along and eats it and moves somewhere else. Whereas these, if you weed, the weed should go back where you pulled it out. If you don't want it to seed, then you've got to catch it. If you don't want seed there, you've got to catch it before. The best time is to catch it is just when it's gone to full expression. And that's when it's just flowering, but not seeded. It's a good way of being able to help suppress them to be able to let the beneficials build up numbers. But if you've got large numbers of something, then you know you've got an imbalance somewhere. That's what it is. That's some wild gooseberry.
Wild gooseberry.
Wild gooseberry, yep. And it again is similar. Most of I haven't got any hops up here to show you.
Yeah,
they work different.
Is that with the purple flowers?
They're all doing different jobs. This guy, he will grow really fast, and his job is to cover the soil. And you will find he's always in areas where there's a lot of cultivation. And now, a lot of dairies, conventional dairies, it's a resource that they never use. And it's just a bloody nuisance, so they just chuck them in the scrub.
Dingoes.
Yeah, which then have a dingo problem or whatever. So, the same with the dairy, all the cows, the dye, all the calves and everything, I always bring them back here, and I started to get a bit of a name for this, so I get a phone call, I've got a dead cow, okay, I'll come pick it up. So quite often the newt's got 4 legs in the air and a big fat cow in the back. I bring it back. I just put a cow in here the other day, and so I'm constantly recycling cows. And you know, there's been, in the compost here, would have been at least over 200 cows, and yet you'd have thought I'd have a pile of bones, huge. But the bones, most of the bones that take a little bit of time to get shoulder blades, leg bones. When you feel the weight of this, there's not much there. One more incorporation, and skulls. This part of the skull takes quite a long time. But by putting it back in or burning it, it's broken down. So this needs working. I just moved that whole lot there and I just put it all here because we're going to clean this all out and we're going to start this area up here to make just compost here. So what I do is mix it with a lot of carbon, wood chip, whatever I can get my hands on, cow manure from the dairy, anything. A friend of mine who's got a organic fertilizer business and he suddenly finds out, so I've got 2.5 tons of meat meal I've got to get rid of because he's in Innisfail and he can't